Hey, welcome to Bear Mountain today, folks. Today we're going to talk about worms and how to get them and how to make your own vermicompost system. So, let's get to it. Okay, for our worm bin, we are not purchasing worms. We are collecting them from compost piles that have been on the property since last fall. This pile right here, under the blue tarp, has been composting away very slowly. It's no longer a hot pile. And what's in it now are all kinds of arthropods, but a lot of little red wiggler worms too. So what we're going to do is harvest from there. You can do this on your own property too. A compost pile that has been sitting for a while, has adequate moisture in it, and is no longer hot will typically start to gather up these types of organisms, particularly the types of worms that live in this kind of debris. It works really well. We're here in the Pacific Northwest, so there's no real point for us to go out and buy worms and have them shipped to us and maybe lose some of them in the process just simply because they're shipped through the mail. So let's dig into the pile and see what we can get out of here. Okay, this pile is a lot of carbon in it. It was old Centenarium cuttings and other things that we had out of the hoop house. So there's still a lot of sticks and stuff in it. And there's a lot of arthropods. We just found a little mud puppy or salamander. And but what we need to do is kind of dig into it because the worms are probably down a few inches down below the surface. And we do have some other things in here like ants and all kinds of things, no rodents or anything, but just in general. Wow, I didn't even have to go very deep and I found my first one. Look at that. Oh, he slipped away. He's fast. Oh, there he is. Yep, my first one. So what we want to do is be careful that we don't take any of the ants with us. The ants will probably have a negative impact on the worms. Not sure why I have ants in the pile today. Oh, here's a whole bunch more. There's some little guys here. Here's another one. Now all these guys, they want to get out of the sun as quickly as possible. So we're going to put them in with the compost itself. There's another one. As you can see, I don't need to dig very deep to start to find it. And there's plenty of moisture in the pile. That's the key too. A dry pile will not have these worms in it. These worms need the moisture to breathe. They breathe through their skin. And so what you want is it's got to be moist to the touch, but not so much that it squeezes any moisture out of it, but just moist enough. Probably roughly 50, 60% type moisture. If you had a moisture meter, it'd be somewhere, that goes from 0 to 10. You'd want it in the 6 or 7 range. Not so wet that it, you lose all your pore space, but wet enough that the worms still have a chance to breathe. And that's the same thing for your vermicompost pile. Very important that you keep pore space in there. One of the things that people do with the vermicompost is they think, oh, they're getting leachate out of the bottom and that's something great for the plants, but actually that's an indicator that your pile is either being overfed and there's too much moisture dropping through, or you got it too wet to begin with. A perfectly balanced vermicompost bin should have very little, if any, moisture down in that bottom tray. And the leachates themselves, typically when you get into that mode and you have excess water coming out, that's an indicator too that it's probably gone anaerobic in parts of your pile or your compost bin. So you want to make certain, oh, there's that good one right here. You want to make certain that you keep it wet enough but not too wet. Here's another one. You can see I don't drop them. which I did. There he is. Oh, he's trying to make a run for it. He's trying to be fast. All righty. Got this guy here. Don't need the sticks. And so we'll just keep kind of going through the pile. It's not a complicated process. You gotta be used to the idea that maybe it's going to be a little wet and a little squishy. Here's another one. So what we do is we come back through here about once a week and take as many of the worms as we can. Then we take the excess compost and we'll put it around our beds, our perennial plants, things of that nature. So lots of times as you go through this, you're going to find most of your worms probably in the top 6 to 12 inches. This time of year they're going to be a little bit, because it's been warm the last week or so, they're going to be a little deeper. There's another guy who's really good looking. And they're going to move pretty quick too, because it's pretty bright out right now. So it helps me find them, but also too, they're very light sensitive and they'll move deep as soon as they get exposed to light. So you got to be a little quick. Oh, that was a snake. Never mind, I don't need him. We've collected quite a few worms for today, and we're going to go put it into the compost bin, the vermicompost bin. So let's go up and do that as soon as we retarp this guy. So we're just at the collection stage right now. This is not a really super layered type of layout right now. We just put some water-soaked shredded paper that we had from office waste, basically copier paper shredded up, into the bottom of it that was wetted down, and then from there just built some layers of the actual compost and kitchen waste itself. The tote is very simple. We're taking 1/4-inch holes and we're drilling them along the top for aeration, and then they're also drilled on the bottom and the sides for aeration. So the bottom allows any moisture to drip out, any excess moisture to drip out. The top allows air in. Part of the system with a good worm composting system is there's a balance of bacteria. It's actually a little ecosystem unto itself. So it's not just the worms in here, but there's also other small microarthropods and bacterias and fungi and stuff of that nature. They're also working in tandem in here with the worms themselves. So the system is simple. We take these props and put them down in the 4 corners of the bin just to keep the bin elevated out of an area where it could be wet. And then the bin itself is simply nested inside. Now the air is going to come from the top, but there's also some room at the sides and the back for airflow to come in. So it's really a rather simple system. And when we do, when we feed it, is we'll push material to the side, and then anything that we have from the house, this would be coffee grounds, eggshells, kitchen waste basically from scrap vegetables and things of that nature. We'll feed this maybe once at this stage because there's so few worms in it. We're feeding it maybe about once every 2 weeks. Now as you get more worms, more activity, more things going on, you may even go to another level. In other words, you'll make another bin just like this one, and we'll set it on top. And the idea would be, as this stuff works itself down, those worms are going to migrate up through the holes of the next level and populate in there, leaving fewer and fewer down below. And what we left down below will be worm castings and worm compost. But the main thing that we're trying to do is just get a large population in here. So if we continue to keep adding additional worms and enough food for them, keep it out of any kind of sunlight. This is kind of a shaded area. It stays cool all day, especially in the summertime. It'll work out great. So basically, this little handy dandy compost bin, We got this on Amazon. It was kind of a pretty cool thing. We'll put a link for it in the show description. But it's got a top to it that is got a little carbon filter in it, so it kind of keeps any odors out. And we just put the material in. You can see we use a fair amount of paper towels, coffee grounds. Guess we drink too much coffee.
Is there anything that you don't want to put in here?
Yeah, you don't want to put any dairy products, meat, scraps, fatty foods like gravy, stuff like that that will basically, I mean, the worms would technically decompose it, but it may cause some off odors and also attract rodents and things that you maybe not want during that decomposition period. But hey, the worms are pretty powerful. If the population is pretty good, they'll pretty much scour things and eat things up. And the bacteria and all that it'll work. There are people who have used worms to decompose things like scrap from slaughterhouses, but it requires a whole different level of complexity that we're not going to go into. It basically takes a lot more balancing carbon, wood chips, paper, stuff like that in there to offset the high nitrogen of the meats and things of that nature. This is fairly moderate nitrogen stuff, so it's not going to really smell either. That's the nice thing about it is even when you look in here and you go, wow, look at all that waste, this material will basically be pretty much odorless and doesn't really attract flies or anything of that nature. So we kind of, we can put in like, in this case, there's some old paper sack, and that's okay. And so okay, one of the things that we want to do on this thing is kind of keep a nice carbon nitrogen balance. This has got a fair amount of green stuff in it. Coffee grounds, even though they're black, are actually kind of fairly green in terms of nitrogen content. A lot of the acidity is already leached out. You drink it as your coffee, and so from a pH standpoint, people think coffee grounds are pretty acidic, and they're actually not that acidic, so it's not too harmful to the worms. The idea is you kind of want to keep a balanced pH in here that's somewhere between 6 and 7. The other thing, sources of carbon you can use, paper towels are great. Basically any paper product that doesn't have any kind of like shiny coating on it, or maybe made with something is an ink that isn't soy based. Cardboard is useful. There's a lot of folks that say, well, there's toxins in the glue that bind the inner pieces of the cardboard to the outer pieces of craft paper. But what we kind of do is we'll shred ours up, and then we'll soak it and rinse it a couple times. And that gets probably rid of 90% of the problem that might be toxic to a worm. And then we don't put that much of it in at a time. The whole idea using cardboard or straw is also a good idea. You can use a little bit of sawdust, as a carbon source. Anything basically that will balance out the carbon nitrogen ratio to closer to maybe 60% carbon and 40% nitrogen or less. So it's 70-30, 60-40. That's kind of where we're kind of hitting. Everybody's got their own little formula for it, and these worms are incredibly forgiving. So from that standpoint, as long as, the main thing for them is they can't dry out, they can't get hot, and they can't get cold, and there's got to be a fairly steady supply of food. The worms are going to do most of their work on the top, probably 4 to 6 inches of the bin itself. So the key to it, I guess, is not letting putting too much in at a time. Now in this case, these are pretty shallow pans, so I've maybe got a total of 6 inches in here, a total of all the bedding material and worms. The other thing is for the worms is they need to have something that's a little bit gritty. Rock dust works, or some soil from your garden, or in this case what we did is we mixed in a fair amount of our own compost that already has some soil in it. We went out as we showed earlier, and we collected our worms, and what we're going to do now is, since we've put the material in for food off to the side, we're going to take these guys and kind of inoculate you know, the system. And they're pretty shy guys, but you can see this compost has got a lot of nice good sticky bacteria and things like that, and that's the other thing that'll help. So we're just going to spread this out a little bit, and the worms, being what they like to be, is kind of hiding. As you can see, we got a whole bunch of little worms that we collected. See these guys? Now one of the things you need to note here is these are called red wigglers. Okay, there's an official scientific name, and we'll put that in the frame there. But these are way different than your earthworms that you see come out of the ground, you know, when it gets too wet or something like that. These guys don't get much bigger than this, a couple inches long, and they're certainly, you know, a fraction of the size of a night crawler or something of that nature. And they specifically live in an environment like this where there's a lot of organic material, and that's where their home is, and that's what they eat. They eat the small bacterias, and they help decompose the material itself. They'll chew away on that, and that's where their life is. So if you're digging worms out of the ground, that's the wrong kind, and it won't work. You have to get them from, you know, a good pile of well-balanced organic material, and you'll know these guys because they're nice. You know, they're nice, about what, inch to 2 inches long, and see, they've already hidden. They're already working their way down into the pile. They're moving fast. And if you see, you know, the little band on them right there, that means that they're mature enough to begin to lay eggs and do things. The younger ones tend to be a little more translucent, and the older ones will be a little redder. So, you know, don't panic if you see a whole bunch of small worms and they don't really have the deep red color. That's okay. That's normal. So we just basically spread these guys in here, and we'll let them live on the top. I think we got a nice harvest today. And they'll work themselves down into the material. You see, here's a nice one. There's a nice mature one. Oop, right here. Oh, there's a better one. It's a young guy, gal, not sure. But they don't like light, and that's the other thing too. They're going to go quickly and bury themselves and get themselves away from any kind of light. Even this indirect light, they're making a run for it. Okay, so we've added the worms, and they're working their way down into the pile. There's plenty of moisture in the pile itself. What we're going to do is we're just going to throw some of this extra carbon on top, just as kind of help it overall balance itself out, and also too, it'll drip a little extra moisture in it. This stuff has been wetted down for a while, so it's got quite a bit of moisture in it. You notice I'm shredding it up into smaller parts. It's just that, you know, for worms, they get teeny weeny mouths, right? So, you know, the bigger the pieces, the longer it takes for something to work itself down into, you know, the final product. And so we're just gonna, you know, like coat it, the top, just with a little bit of it. It doesn't have to be super thick. What we try to do is just add some material like this on a regular basis. And what I'll come through is every week I'll go down and, oh, there's some plastic on that one. Definitely don't want that one. Every week I'll go do a collection and so as much as I can. And the idea is I just keep adding anywhere from, you know, another 30 to 150 worms at a shot. These guys have been working in this pile now for a couple of weeks. So I'm anticipating that when we get into July and August, when the nighttime temperatures have been nice and mild, and these guys have had plenty to eat, that they'll have populated this bin pretty good. Then we'll move on to the next stage, which is making a much more bigger feeding operation that'll take into account not just kitchen waste, but other things on the farm itself. So that's basically it. We put that on. The lid this is a typical Rubbermaid Roughneck, and we just put the lid on, make sure it's clamped itself down, and that's it. There's nothing much to it. Some folks drill some holes in the top and put some screening on it just to keep you know, maybe more airflow, but we've got pretty good airflow on the sides. We'll check it every few days or so to make sure nothing's out of whack or going weird on it. It doesn't smell, and so we just kind of keep it tucked back here in the corner.
Kind of our composting station.
Yeah. At some point we'll do a video on our compost tea maker. We've got some parts that we've got to replace on it, so we're not quite ready to fire that baby up yet. So I want to thank you guys for watching today, and as always, leave comments if you can, or if you feel the mood to. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you're not a subscriber. And so have a good day. Bye. Or bye-bye.